Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, everybody. Welcome back to Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by Minerva Gaines. Minerva, thank you for coming on the show.
Hi, Eric. Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
I get to be a guest on your podcast.
I know. So for those that don't know, Minerva is a regular on Ken Royball's Police Applicant Podcast. That's how we got acquainted.
Yes, so I'm one of the co-hosts. We have another one, Donovan Heavener, which I know you know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of the co-hosts on the Police Applicant Podcast. And, sometimes when I get too busy and I can't do it, Donovan steps in for me. So it's been great. It's been a lot of fun.
So appropriate. I mean, such a good crew. It's been a blast to get acquainted with you and Ken and Donovan, local legend, who I've known for some time. Speaking of busyness, it's very appropriate because we've been talking about doing an episode for quite a while.
3 months or so.
For one of them, for sure, I was sick. It might have been COVID. Who knows? Where I couldn't say more than like 4 words without having to clear my throat. Between that and then just busyness, right?
We discussed it. Then I went on vacation. And when I got back, I myself had COVID. So I wasn't feeling too hot. But and then just life kind of got in the way. And you were like, okay, like it's time. Let's do this.
Yeah. Well, I love that you went on vacation. And a recent guest I just had, Jared Hardy, was saying that maybe you should make your evaluations based off how much leave people actually take. The leave they earn, they should take it. You can evaluate an agency that way and the culture that way. I was like, what a challenging paradigm, right? What a twist on things.
Yeah, but I feel like, so I'm very big on taking vacations. I will never, ever max out on vacation time. I guarantee you that much. If anything, I'm like, hey, if you can donate time, please give it to me. I do agree that for your mental health, you need to take some time away from everything if you can, and go explore. There's so much world out there, and you learn so much about people too when you travel. Different cultures and the way they do things in their cities. So I think it's good for people to travel.
Minerva is a retired cop. I think it's very appropriate when we talk about wellness, we talk about work-life balance, taking time, whatever version of vacation, as long as it's legit, like as long as it's not like, oh, I did a staycation, I'm on my work phone and I'm checking my work emails. I'm like, that doesn't count. But I love that aspect of unplugging. Sometimes it's a little bit off the grid where your phone really doesn't work very well. I think that's really helpful for people. So what's one of the most intriguing places you've been?
So I just started traveling a lot after my ex-husband and I separated. That's when I really started traveling. But I will say that's the most beautiful place that I've been to and was the most relaxing was Bora Bora.
That's like the calendar. Yeah, that's the calendar setting.
No, but I mean,
that's good for you.
I think I've gained something from everywhere I've gone. So I travel solo too, which is a whole other thing than traveling with somebody, right?
Yeah.
But my first solo trip was to Thailand. I was there for 2 weeks. And first of all, Thailand is super cheap. It's very beautiful. The people are just amazingly friendly. The food is delicious. I just love learning about new cultures. And, like I said, I would go back there. Like I was like, I don't want to leave. I don't. But obviously, you got to come back to reality. I've been to Cuba. For me growing up as I was born in the late 70s. So all throughout the 80s, Cuba was like this place that you just couldn't go to, especially if you were a U.S. citizen.
Yeah.
And that was very interesting because, Cuba infrastructure is so old, it's kind of stuck in the 50s. Even their cars are, right? So that was very interesting too. And then this last trip, I went to Barcelona for a few days, and then I took a 9-day Mediterranean cruise. So different ports, different people, different vibe. I just love it. I think you gain something from everywhere you go.
Yeah, like 100%. I'd fully agree. I haven't been to Bora Bora, but Thailand was fantastic. I think third world countries, you really get a strong appreciation for things. Concrete floors, everywhere's so crowded. Thailand, I think it's the land of 1,000 smiles, or that's kind of their tagline, right? But
They're so nice there,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
everybody seems happy.
yeah. But a lot
Not
of people
saying that
don't have
they
a
are,
lot.
but that's
Yeah.
definitely what it appears like. Yeah, so my family's from a third world country. Both my parents are from Guatemala, and I went to Guatemala the last time I was 12. So it's been quite a while. Most of my family's here, which is the only reason why I haven't been.
Mm,
But I definitely want to take my kids there so they can appreciate what they have, because
yeah.
it is a lot different over there, And Cuba, when I went to Cuba, they don't have internet like we do here,
No.
and they don't have food. They have to go get food. It is a communist country still.
Mm-hmm.
So things are a lot different there than they are here, for sure.
Yeah, I love that. And for those that are doing all the overtime and working 6-7 days a week to try to provide the things that they didn't have as a kid for their kids, I'm like, that's such a, no offense, but it's such a fool's errand, right? I think that if you ask any kid what they want, is they want their parents to be around more. So
They want time.
yeah, and you'll never have it back. And that's like the phase I'm in now. My daughter's 4, and luckily I think a lot of my inputs and a lot of my role models are continually sharing that it goes fast, right? And it's not just the adage like, hey, just don't blink, but they have kids that are becoming teenagers, and they have mentors and friends at work that their kids are grown, and I can't believe it, right? Their kids are in their
That's
20s, and I
me.
remember seeing them as little kids.
Yep. Yep. I have a college sophomore and I have a
Mm-hmm.
high school senior, and I'm sure we'll go back to this, but when I retired, they were still in elementary school, but for so long they couldn't do a lot of extra activities because my ex-husband is also in law enforcement
Mm.
and I was in law enforcement, and with that comes long hours.
Yeah.
Or especially if you have two people who are married in law enforcement, they usually tend to do opposite schedules to accommodate children and childcare and all that other stuff. It gets hard. There are times where kids were like, yeah, like we were in daycare for 12 hours. And I'm like, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And man, like what parents have to do, part of what we're going to talk about is women in policing, but I think about women in the workforce, and that's something that hits close to home. My mom, she poured it on to carry and provide for me and my sister, not just financially, but, emotionally, and just like really our support. My dad was kind of in the picture, but not in a significant way. So we were latchkey kids, right? But she would get up so early to get everything set up, get the lunch going, and leave notes and leave reminders and everything, and call us, make sure we were up and kind of check in. And she was doing it, but like how much pressure is that, right? And on top of everything, and just making a family work.
I think it's a lot. Obviously now I'm a single parent, although my ex-husband is still very much involved and my kids are older now, but
Mm-hmm.
it is a lot because now, I'm the head of the household now, right? I have to be able to provide financially and emotionally and in all ways that all parents have to do so, right? While still keeping a full-time job.
Yeah.
And that pressure, and that, there's societal pressures and then there's pressures that you put on your own, right? So yeah, it is hard. So yeah, definitely kudos to your mother and any single parent out there, man or woman, because it is a lot.
Do you find, we're going to go out of order, but when you were a cop and managing these long shifts and your kids were young, did you find that challenge of having the emotional bandwidth, right? Because you see all this stuff at work, it's mentally draining, physically draining. You're on your feet, you're working those long of hours. I forget sometimes until I talk to my friends about, a 7-8 hour workday. I talk about 10s being short, right? I'm like, oh, we're not doing 12s anymore. 10s are amazing. And they're like,
Yeah.
what are you talking about? But yeah, with all that, did you find challenges at times, and what helped you through that?
Yeah. So at the time I was married and my ex-husband had been tapped to be in a task force. He was on the Joint Terrorist Task Force. So he was kind of on loan to the FBI. And so he automatically got like a detective's hours, 410. And at the time I was working patrol and we worked three 12-hour shifts.
Mm-hmm.
Since he worked Monday through Thursday, I would work weekends. And, as you've worked patrol, I was not a day shift person. I always like working the graveyard shift. That's what I would work. I was like, hey, if I have to work patrol, I have to do graveyards. Like I cannot do day shift unless I absolutely have to, which in our agency, you could stay on nights for 2 years, but then you have to switch over for one deployment. Our deployments were 6 months long and then you could go back.
Okay.
It wasn't hard in the sense that we worked long shifts because we had opposite schedules, but it was hard when he had to go on surveillance on weekends and I had to work. And then it was like, who's going to watch the kids?
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
then you're home early, you're tired, but that's when the kids are up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So those were some challenging times, but he would help out a lot. He would take the kids out so I could get some sleep. Then I would have my breakfast, which was like their lunch or a snack. And then I would go off to work. So, yeah.
Yeah. Props to all the first responder families that figure it out. Like they just have to, and they do it. And it's,
you have no choice. What can you do?
Dispatch, fire, to be working 72-hour stretches and whatnot. And it's crazy, but I do know a lot of families that did kind of what you all did as far as, cool, you have kid coverage most of the time, but then you don't have the couple overlap, right? You don't have the whole family together. Or you have the days and nights thing. Such a challenge.
Yeah. And then, because during the week I would have to go to court or I had training. So even then my kids would have to go to daycare. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one time my ex-husband would take our daughter to this Hawaiian place that they really liked. And they would go there like every Saturday. It was like their place. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I decided to take a day off. So we went there and the lady, the owner of the restaurant was like, oh, is this your girlfriend? And he was like, no, this is my wife.
Yeah.
Like she got so used to just seeing him and
idea,
our daughter that he had no idea that there was like a wife around and stuff. But so, I mean, you just do what you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean it's not challenging. It is. There definitely is that work-life balance. And then, that's why there's such a high divorce rate too in law enforcement, right? Because you end up working the long hours. You're not home. Yeah, my ex-husband and I didn't have a lot of time together as a couple because we were always on opposite schedules, and he had the kids or I had the kids. So yeah, it does become a lot.
To rewind back a bit, you're talking about, I know a lot of departments do that where, hey, you can bid your preferred shift, but after so many rotations, you need to do this other shift. And big picture, I mean, of course, your preference would have been to stay what you want to do. Do you think that's good? Do you think that's good overall for a department or for the individual?
I think for the department, it just makes it fair for everybody there. So I get why agencies do it. They're, unlike you as an individual, they're worried about how the department runs, right? And what's going to be fair to everybody. So I get that. They're not going to be worried about all the officers' families. It would be nice, but it's just not, because then what do you do then? What do you do for the single person?
Yeah.
The single girl, the single guy, right?
Yeah. They figure
Is it
out
fair to them to always be
deal.
stuck working weekends, graveyards? Like that's not fair to them either, right?
Yeah.
So it really is in the individual and their spouse or significant other to figure out what's going to be best for their families too. I mean, I like working graveyard weekends, but if I didn't, would I really have a choice? Not really, because that's just what worked best for my family at that time.
I think there's different systems. I mean, so many places do it so many different ways. For my department, it's all seniority based. There's no reverse bid for officers or sergeants or anything.
We didn't have that either, based by seniority, yeah.
And then I do have, we have neighbors that do that where, hey, every so many, you have to take your second choice or you have to change off. And I always thought maybe it was for like a morale kind of wellness factor, right? If you're on graves for so long, then you kind of get burned out on certain elements of human nature. You don't see normal people. So I thought maybe it'd be for that or just to keep you fresh. But at the same time, there's so many things you can't choose in this job that, I hate making things mandatory in the big picture. But also, I think it's also helpful that in my department, since I hired on, there were plenty of senior guys and gals that just preferred graveyard. And so there was never really a time when you're stuck somewhere for too long. You could usually work up a little bit of seniority and get your not last choice, maybe your medium choice. And then also we all had to, all the way up, no matter how senior you are, you have to rotate to weekends. And so there wasn't a shift where you always had weekends off, unless you're in a special assignment. So I guess there's a curveball there.
Right. So your department definitely was a lot better about making sure people rotated around, whereas the agency at the time, I don't know now because I've been retired for a little over 11 years now, but at the time it really was like, hey, you could get, if you want to work graveyards, you could do so for 2 years, but then you have to rotate out at least for day shift, at least one deployment, and then you can go back to nights.
Gotcha.
And that's what most people, that's just those were our only options. So
it is what it is,
it was
right?
by seniority. Yeah. And it is. You learn on this job that it is what it is. That's just, and you just deal with it, right? You adjust to it.
For sure. I think that's less so than traditionally, right? Like traditionally, the job is what it is, and there's so much change and there's so much competition, where people can try to find a better workplace and someone's offering this. And
See, and that's new.
Shifted. Yeah, exactly.
That's new because when I came on the job, I initially got hired by LAPD back in 1999. And even then that you didn't see people like transfer or lateral to other agencies. Like that was unheard of. You did your 30 years and then you're out in the same agency.
Yeah.
Right. Now people are like, shopping around like, oh, what can I get from you? And it's different times too, right? Back then being a cop was like an honorable job. Nowadays it's hard to find people who want to do the job. Yeah. And sometimes those that want to can't always get hired, right? They have things that are in their background that prevent them or whatever the case may be. But it's different times for sure than what I'm used to.
Yeah, so different. There's some would say there's no loyalty now. Some people make a whole career out of lateraling, right?
That's crazy to me because you're always constantly starting over.
Yeah, but
that's how I see it.
Now they get the bonuses, and this is a total stereotype. There are amazing lateral officers, but I call them unicorns because generally, unless life circumstances changed or you hit a glass ceiling or there's just no opportunity, generally the people that are grinders and really team oriented, even when things aren't great, they're kind of in the suck, they're with their people unless they just do a move, right? I get that. Now, what I appreciate about the job market is if your department is not great, if your leadership is not supportive, then you ought to have that opportunity. And so it does, I think, big picture, it creates this need for agencies to take care of their people better. So they're not stuck with where you hired on, where you just happen to get a foot in the door. However, there is the other end of the spectrum where, some people are running from their problems, every few years they get burned and it's always their narrative, the victim mentality, oh, this place didn't treat me right. And then they go over here and then they get a bonus and then they restart and then they burn some bridges and they jump again because people are desperate too. And they'll take someone that might be able to do the job okay.
Or their background is just okay.
Their background's just okay, yeah. And then another curveball these days is totally new is, we have people that are jumping ship, trying to jump ship in academy. They're talking, and we've been on the receiving end of that where just with the circumstances, it's tough, but it used to be like a no-fly zone. You do not leave in academy. You do not leave right after. We had a guy leave right after he graduated academy, and we put 9 months of money 9 months of salary into him, right? So, and everyone has their reasons. At the same time, we have recent grad, got done with field training and then immediately knocking on our door, and we're not in a position where we can really say no, and they're sharp people. So I don't want to conflate and make this conversation part of what I was just talking about. Everyone's different, but it's also kind of the market, right? Where I'm literally I told a candidate that, we extended a conditional offer and we were not able to catch up with the timeline where she has a final offer elsewhere. And so what I don't appreciate about police culture or any employer culture is she feels compelled potentially to go with that place because final offers at the door. She doesn't know if she can pass on it. She asked for some time to think about it. And the chief said, hey, you got a couple days. Let me know by Sunday. And I'm like, no one's going to pick up the phone on Sunday for one. And two, Like, that's not making about the candidate. That's not making about, this young lady's career. That's being selfish and manipulating and coercing essentially a decision out of
It's basically
frustrating that.
forcing her to make a choice like now.
Yeah, it's the ultimatum, and I get maybe their hiring situation is not great, and they know that, we're catching up and we could easily win the battle if it's apples to apples. But it just stinks big picture. I hate that. And I think that probably says something about the leadership and how that person is going to treat their people. When you do hire on, like, you don't even work for him. He's already
Yeah, but
making demands of you.
I see. I think it's just such a different time. Like when I worked at my agency, part of my job was also doing recruitment
Mm-hmm.
on top of doing backgrounds. So you're kind of like what you do, but such different times. Back then we would have like 2-3 positions and we'd have 500 candidates.
Yeah.
Now agencies could barely get anybody and they have like 20-30 openings, right? So I
Yeah.
understand the desperation on the agency side, but I also understand how this is kind of, how like when there are too many houses, it becomes a seller's market. Now it's a
Mm-hmm.
candidate's market,
Oh, for
right? As to
sure.
what
Yeah.
agency they want to go to. And we tell people in our podcast, like, look, just pick your top 3
Mm-hmm.
and go with those.
Yeah.
So I can also understand, like, hey, if someone's offering you the job, you don't say no.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why you better be very selective as to where you apply.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like, you probably give this advice all the time, right? It depends on the candidate. And sometimes whatever resume and however you're presenting, everyone's clamoring. And then other agencies might have some pause and you're recognizing, okay, what is my hireability? And then if you get some disqualifying or some removals from different agencies, and then all of a sudden someone is very interested, then yeah, if you read the climate, you read the room, you're like, okay, this is the one I'm going, right? But what I said to her in big picture, it's about her, not about me, not about my team. But yeah, do what's right for you. Like, chew on it. I totally get bird in hand. I totally get going with that. And as before, like, I will support you, and it's about more good cops all around. However, in light of the candidate markets, hey, if in time, in a couple years, is not everything that was promised to you, because that's an integrity thing, as far as the agency, and they're not taking care of you and your needs, then please think about you and your career and whether it's going the direction that it is. It'll likely be a very fruitful career, right? Again, about the candidate, like, she's sharp, she's a hardworking person. There's no reason why it wouldn't be a fruitful career, but I think it is the recruiter in me and kind of the competitive nature. I'm like, come on. But you're right.
Yeah,
it's all
I
part of the
can't.
game.
I honestly cannot imagine what it would be like right now to be doing recruitment. There's just so many challenges that you guys are facing compared to when I did it. So kudos to you guys and good luck to all of you guys.
I thought it was.
But you're right. I think candidates need to see what's going to be best for them, where they're going to be the better fit. And that, and life is going to change too. Like, don't just think about the now, think about the future. Like, you may be married, you may have kids. Is this still the agency that would help with that? Sometimes it's hard to see that far in advance, but then again, there's the whole thing we were talking about. People like to move around. So maybe they don't think about it like that. I'm still thinking on the, hey, I'm going to do my 30 years here and not lateral somewhere else. So yeah, it's just a different time.
I do hear a lot of people that we bring through a process that do say, hey, like, I want to make sure it's the right decision. I don't want a lateral. And I think that's the goal, right? The goal is that you visualize what you want in a patrol job, you visualize what you want in a career, and what agency will afford you that type of pace, the type of specialties, the type of assignments, work-life balance, right? And so when we are unapologetically honest about what life looks like at our department, we call it a grind all the time when we first meet people. Because if you don't want to go and you're like, that sounds like maybe a lot of fun for 2 years, and then after that I don't want to burn out. A certain type of person should lean away, and that's only going to help out, right? And maybe they find a smaller, safer suburban agency, and that might be a fantastic thing for that agency and that officer. I think in the big picture, if everyone's just, a little bit more candid, it's definitely what's helped us. And I think, from your perspective, I'm curious if you think that's helpful too from backgrounds, because I'm still talking to a lot of candidates that it might be policy, but policies can be altered. But so many candidates have zero clue why they get DQ'd somewhere. And I think that doesn't do anyone a service, because if they're really close to being hireable, then why not give them some feedback so they can get picked up at another agency and help public safety? Whereas if they're not, and you're like, hey, you got stuff in your record, you're not going to get hired by any police agency. And just telling them that, like, isn't that a good thing? So they don't have to keep wasting their time and their passion on this dream that just won't pan out.
Yeah, I wish agencies would tell candidates like what is the issue that they found, and but usually, as someone who did backgrounds, and I did backgrounds cumulative among two agencies for about 10, 11 years, both sworn and civilian. Mostly people know why they're being disqualified. It's their background, right? Because background investigators really were just the fact finders, and we document those facts. So all of this is information that you know. Now, whether or not you were upfront about it during the background process, that's a whole other issue, right? I know a lot of agencies have gotten away from letting people know why they were disqualified. I don't know when that happened, because before, we would tell people, and then it was like, no, we're just going to send them a letter that they were either non-selected or, we've moved on with other more qualified people. Yeah, I don't know why agencies are doing that. I don't know if it's a liability issue or what it is, but how is the person supposed to improve? How is a candidate supposed to improve, right? Without knowing what to improve on. So yeah, I don't know. I wish they would go kind of the pendulum will swing back, and the investigators could tell people why. Me personally, I sometimes told my candidates would know, especially if something came up in their background and we had a clarification interview, they kind of know what's going on.
Yeah.
I was very open with my candidates, like, hey, like, tell me about the situation. I'll be like, hey, I need you to come in. We got to discuss something that came up in your background, and then we would discuss it in person. I wouldn't do it over the phone. But yeah, I think overall people do know what it is. It's whether or not they also want to take a look at it or, accept it too, right?
Yeah.
Take responsibility for their actions. But again, how are you supposed to improve? Take a look at, your PHS, or actually now everything's like online, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Do they get to keep a copy of it?
So what I say, a lot of them are online platforms, and I think that most savvy candidates keep a copy, or they have all the information on a Word doc, or they can copy and paste it from this profile to that profile. I mean, that's for sure the way. Then you're consistent. You're not inadvertently, just human error making these mistakes that become disqualifiers because it's inconsistent. So generally, I think that's what most people do. But I do hear other agencies.
That's what I would recommend. Keep copies.
Yeah, for sure. I do hear other agencies that do share. I talk to candidates that say, yeah, Sergeant blah, blah, blah said, hey, this may be an issue going into the next phase. And so if they do get disqualified in the chief's round or the command board, then they know, yeah, it was that thing. Another extreme is just this gentleman isn't even in our process. I've been trying to kind of mentor him through the social media page. And he relayed that he was making it far through the background and going into this next phase. And then all of a sudden he's like, I guess I'm going to hear back in a couple weeks on the next steps. And I was like, what does that even mean? He's like, I don't know. I was like, well, it doesn't sound good. Like, well, it would take a couple weeks to hear from not the background guy. He's like, yeah, he said I'd get something in the mail. And I'm like, well, that sounds like you're going to get a removal or a DQ letter in the mail. Like, what else would come in the mail weeks later from a place that's aggressively hiring or trying to make up a lot of vacancies? And he's like, no, that's what I think. And I was like, maybe it's coming from HR, right? So it's outside of the PD. But why not just tell the guy, hey, it's the end of the road. You're going to get a removal in a couple weeks. I don't see how that could be a stretch, And so maybe it's process. I'm not blaming the background officer. I'm saying, yeah, it could be easily fixed. Hey, it's done.
And it could be policies too that the department has. So at the time when I did backgrounds, my agency had a tattoo policy. You couldn't have any visible tattoos while you were in uniform, period. Right. And at the time, people didn't have as many tattoos as nowadays people do, So I don't see, look, personally, me, I like it when I don't see a ton of tattoos on cops, but that's just how society has kind of moved now. Almost everybody has like a sleeve or something, right? Or a half sleeve or something. And does that really prevent that person from doing police work? Possibly being a good cop? It doesn't. I just hope people like agencies, and this is to the chiefs or agencies, like really take a step back and like, is this really worth losing good candidates for?
Yeah, so many agencies have way more liberal tattoo policies now, so that's good. Yeah, I think that we just have to look at the times, and that they could talk about that in a lot of background areas, but it's people helping people, and sometimes tattoos are a great icebreaker. I don't have any, but I see a lot of times, someone with visible tattoos, it's like you're part of the club, right? You're in the culture, and it breaks down walls. People talk about their tattoos, and someone in crisis, to share what's on their arm, and then an officer shows what's on, his or her arm. Not to say it's the end all be all, but like it could be a tool, and we just have to be mindful. And so for the younger listeners, if you want to be a cop, or you are a cop now, and what you do and how you do it, but think of what you say, what you do publicly, social media, what you put on your body in ink. Think about the worst way that could be interpreted in a bad situation. And if it passes all those kind of litmus tests, and then it's probably all right. And I'll just kind of leave it at that, right? Sometimes you don't even mean to have a certain saying or a certain image. You don't mean it to mean something, but the fact that you're not a cop and it's very visible on your forearm, then maybe it does kind of say something.
Yeah, because you're representing the agency too, right? You're a representative of the city, of the agency.
Yeah,
and,
the law. You're the government, right?
The career, right? It's funny because I just heard this yesterday on the news. The fire department, LAFD, put out a survey out for, the citizens of the city of LA to see if they were okay with their firemen having tattoos. And they interviewed this lady, and she was like, when someone's saving my life, I'm not too worried about whether they have tattoos or not.
Right.
I just want to be saved.
And if they don't say that, then they're lying. If they say that's not true, I do care.
Yeah, like, oh, wait, you have tattoos.
Okay, you want to get saved?
Where's the next firefighter who does it?
Yeah, like, I'll wait the 10 minutes.
Yeah, I do get it, though, because traditionally, law enforcement is very paramilitary, right? And before it was like only sailors and Marines would have like a tattoo here or there, right? But now you do have full-on sleeves, people with full-on sleeves, and it doesn't always look the most professional. I get that, like when someone's wearing their Class B, which is the short sleeve uniform. And some agencies make people cover them. They have to wear, like long sleeve shirts and stuff. But when it's like 105 degrees out here, like who's wearing long sleeve shirts?
Yeah.
You don't want to, right? But I get it. I'm, like I think Ken and I discussed this in one of our episodes. And Ken is very old school, but he was a cop back in the 70s and 80s, right? We're now in 2023. Like things have changed, and I kind of get both sides because I came on like in the late 90s, but now that I'm like does it really matter? You guys are hurting for people. Like doesn't mean that they can't be good cops.
We're hiring people that were born in 2001, 2002.
Oh my God.
Like that's
I'd already graduated college, started my career. Yeah, no, I remember that when I was still doing backgrounds and people were born like after I graduated high school. I was like, damn, I'm getting old.
Yeah. For a little bit, it's almost like the check IDs, and you're like, there's no way. And you're like, oh my gosh. And then you have to do your own self-check and be like, what year is it? That is 21 years ago. Well, shoot, we went all over the place, and I love it. There is a part where I generally want to ask what brought you into law enforcement, and what was it about law enforcement that really jumped out at you, and tell us a little bit about your career.
Yeah, so I actually was born and raised here in LA, and I still reside in the city of Los Angeles, but I grew up on 18th Street, and 18th Street is one of the largest Latino gangs in LA. And I grew up there in the 80s when LA was the gang capital of the world,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I saw a lot of gang narcotics activity in my neighborhood growing up. And I would always see these officers. At the time, we would call them narcs because they were not in marked cars.
Yeah.
And there was this Black female officer, and I was like, man, I want to be like her. Like, that's who I want to be with. Like, she would bring us lollipops. And, I grew up seeing teenage girls getting pregnant with hickeys on their necks. And I just never was like, that is just not the lifestyle that I wanted for myself, like ever. To me, I was like, what is so appealing about this? I was like, I want to be like her, the female cop. So that's, since I was like age 5, that's all I ever wanted to do.
Oh.
And my parents did good about putting me into music and extracurricular activities to kind of keep me busy and not be, always hanging out outside. I mean, my whole life I wanted to be a cop, and I went into college, majored in criminal justice, which, by the way, I do not recommend that you get a degree in criminal justice because this doesn't do you any good. And then shortly after graduating, I got hired by LAPD back in 1999, and I went through part of their academy. I failed out of the academy with 6 weeks to graduate. And at the time, their academy was 28 weeks long.
Wow.
So, yeah, I know. I know, it totally sucked. So I forgot to mention that when I was in college, I became a police cadet for the Glendale Police Department here in California.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like an internship when you're in college. I worked in the evidence room. So that exposed me a lot to work, to law enforcement. And I was able to talk to police officers, and so that even put the fire more in me that this is really what I want to do. And went to the LAPD, failed out. Glendale gave me my job back as a civilian, as a community service officer.
Mm-hmm.
While I went through the background process again, I reapplied with LAPD, applied with Glendale as a full-time officer because I had literally gone from agency to agency to agency. My background was really easy, and I was really young at the time too.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of life experience under me. But LAPD offered me a job right away to go back to the academy. I would have had to start from day 1 or day 0, Black Monday that we had. And I deferred my entrance, waiting on Glendale. And second month, they offered me the job again. I called my background investigator and I was like, I would like to defer my entrance. And he told me, he was like, I know what you're doing. You're waiting for Glendale to offer you the job. And I was like, yeah, I pretty much had grown up there. I started working there when I was 19 as a police cadet. And then he was like, if we offer you the job one more time, which is going to be your third time, and you don't accept it, that's it. And I said, I fully understand. Well, the third month comes around. They offered me a job, and I go to Glendale to give my 2 weeks notice, and they're like, you're hired. I go, are you sure? I go, I need it in writing. Like, I needed something in writing, right? And they're like, no, we're sure. So I called, my background investigator wasn't around, with LAPD wasn't around. So I spoke to the sergeant, and the sergeant was like, Glendale's a good agency. He's like, good luck with your career. But if anything ever happens, LAPD is still here.
That's nice.
I said, thank you, sir. Yeah. So, and then I did my career at Glendale. I was a police officer for about 12 years. I started in patrol like everybody else does. I think my first round, I did about 5.5 years in patrol. Then I went to the community policing unit, did that for about 2 years. And from there, I went to the background unit, or to personnel. Did backgrounds for about 2.5 years. Went back to patrol because then my kids now were in school and I needed that patrol schedule again.
Oh, yeah.
And then I got hurt my back, got put on light duty. They put me in backgrounds because I already had experience doing that. And I ended up being medically retired out of there. That was my career.
Well, thank you for
and then now, and then that allowed me to get a job. My background since I had done backgrounds, I ended up working with the city of LA doing backgrounds for LAPD.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So it's like a loop.
Yeah.
From LA to Glendale back to LA.
Full circle.
Yeah.
I think everything happens for a reason. And, especially with things not working out, I love that resilient story, especially for younger cops, or even, I always say younger cops on the show, but then it's really cool to have people that are very close in tenure to me, or people that have been around for a while that are listening in, because it is remotivating, and it's It's little reminders, right? I think it's really impactful to have the little reminders of resilience when we put in for things, and whether it's the job itself or an assignment, like we don't get it all. And some people get it all, but it's because they really worked hard and they have good relationships and it's fantastic. But I've certainly put in for things. I think that some people would think that I get everything I put in because I have gotten some really awesome opportunities, but I'd be quick to remind them that there's definitely things that I tried to do that were no-goes, right? I lost out to the better person on the day, and that's okay. It's all part of the process. Or I had to wait my time and wait my turn, and that's still a work in progress. But I also want to remind and I guess focus back to what you said about why you even came in. And you saw a female officer that was a role model, maybe idyllic. It was maybe the epitome of what you wanted to be, that, manifested physical form in front of you. And that was what inspired you, right? And I think that if you said that to a lot of, cynical cops, they'd be like, oh yeah, whatever. But it's like, no, think about how many cops are cops because of that, right? Whether it was something on TV or someone that they met, like a DARE officer, a school resource officer, or just someone helping out their buddy or their family or them, or just seeing that on the streets and wanting to be that. I mean, you are that. So it is so impactful that we're mindful of that and the purpose and the why. And I love that it was something as simple as that.
It is. And it was a female officer because in the 80s, there weren't, I mean, at least I don't think there were as many female officers as you see now. You didn't really see them, or, a lot of them did a lot of office work or work with juveniles, like the juvenile division, right? Because we're supposed to be motherly, To see a female officer out on the streets, like, to me, I was like, damn, like that's what I want to do. I want to be her, So she was like this role model for me. And I wish I could remember her name. And Ken and I have tried figuring out who she was, because Ken was an officer at the division that she worked out of.
Okay.
But we never figured it out. Yeah, and it's funny because my mother tried to put me into all this extracurricular activities like music. I went to high school that was a music academy. I went into college as a music major. At the end of the day, I still became a cop. That's what I really, really wanted to do. This is what, at my core, this was my dream job, and I got to do it. Yeah. And I'm fortunate that way.
That's so good. And yeah, to see someone that is like you. You saw a female officer. It was different than just seeing a male officer. And you're like, I can do that. For my own reflection, it kind of took me aback because I was meeting a younger candidate, Latino male. We'd been messaging and emailing, and we had a phone chat. And then when we met in person, he was like, oh, Sergeant Tong, that's so cool that you're Asian. I'm like, is it so cool that I'm Asian? And I was kind of caught off guard, right? And because, we're in a pretty diverse area. And so my race doesn't typically come up a lot in like conversation, like, sure, I'm Asian. But he's like, no, I think that's so cool. You're a sergeant and you're Asian. And I'm like, still, like, I'm not really with you, man. But like almost for a second, I'm like, well, I take that for granted, but he sees a minority that has been elevated to a position of power and a position of influence. So not only is he trying to be an officer, but he's like, man, this is the type of culture, like, maybe I can be a leader. Maybe I can be a supervisor one day. So I chew on that every now and then, because I was only about a year ago, but I was like, is that crazy that I haven't really reflected in that way, that I could be that? I've shared with some people that when I hired on, race is a factor in my mind, because I wondered if I was getting hired because of my race. I wondered if I was number one on the hiring list because I was, this Asian kid that went to college, right? And that must look good for a city. That must look good for an agency. But I wonder if that's almost like a chip on my shoulder, because I definitely failed oral boards too, right? It was me practicing and getting better at oral boards. So I'm like, no, okay, like, bring yourself out of that. But I always wanted to really prove myself, right? And I think that it's a topic in hiring, right? We want to hire for diversity, but we don't want it to be driven by diversity. And so I think that's important to say, like, I love seeing diverse candidates. It's like, but that's not going to get you the job. As recruiters, we should want to bridge and engage those that don't typically think about the job. I think that's what certainly a diverse community would benefit from. But at the same time, it's not going to win the day. And for the non-diverse candidates, I would say, one, diversity is so much more than race. It's so much more than what you look like. So I want to challenge some of those older notions that hear diversity and they think that means affirmative action. No, I'm just saying, We want people to be different because people out there are different, and that's going to help us better understand them to do the job.
Yeah, I think diversity shouldn't be the only hiring factor, obviously, right? So I think we're in agreement in that. But I can kind of relate to this young man in a sense. Law enforcement is very male dominant. It's a male dominant career, right? That I had here. But I remember when I saw my first female chief, and I was like, wow, like there's a female chief,
Yeah.
And I'd already been on the job, I think 5-6 years at that point, because my agency, although we're the third largest city in LA County, not a lot of women were in positions like higher, positions. I think the highest at the time was one female sergeant. And everybody else was in patrol. Actually, there were two female sergeants. One of them was in detective and the other one was in patrol. And there were some female detectives, but mostly all the rest of the females were in patrol. And some were SROs, because again, this whole motherly thing, right? And I put that in air quotes for those that can't see me. But so for me to see a female chief, I was like, wow. Now, being chief of police was never my goal. I've never been that person. But I thought it was pretty cool to see.
For sure.
Because I hadn't seen that. And then when I started working with LAPD doing civilian backgrounds, and I was working at their headquarters, and I saw so many women with brass on their, collars, I thought that was awesome.
Yeah.
And women of different backgrounds and races, like Black, white, Asian, like Latinos, I had never seen that, and I remember one time, kind of going back to where you're talking about diversity shouldn't be an only factor. I remember sitting in court in downtown for a multi-agency case, and this deputy who was a sergeant, I think he was a sergeant with LA County Sheriff's, we're both sitting outside waiting to testify in court. And he was like, hey, he's like, you work for, I was like, I work for Glendale. And he was like, oh, okay. He's like, how long have you been on? I think at the time I'd been on 8 years or something like that. And he's like, have you worked patrol? And I go, yeah, I work patrol. I did 5.5 years in patrol or something like that. He's like, you should lateral to my division. You'd be golden. I go, what does that mean? He's like, you could be a lieutenant by now.
Yeah.
And I was like, why? Because I'm a female? I go, I don't want to be given a position just because I'm a female.
Yeah.
I want to earn it.
Yeah.
I go, I don't want to be given things. I want to earn them.
Yeah.
So, and I was like, nah, I'm good.
Exactly.
I want to be able to earn them. But at the same time, I realized that in my agency, even when I was there, the highest ranking female got to lieutenant. My agency has never had a female captain, even till now. And I've been gone. They've never had a female deputy chief, let alone a chief of police.
Yeah.
How is that possible? Are you telling me that none of these females, and who knows if they apply, right? Because kind of going back to a question that you asked about balancing work as a female in law enforcement and the family, it's harder to promote. I see why sometimes women, I choose not to promote because you have family obligations.
Yeah. You're at the bottom of the totem pole again, right? So if you have an assignment or you have the seniority for the shift, and that's, that prevents a lot of people from promoting as they have to go to graveyard. Right. So certainly if you are the primary caretaker, that's a heavy lift.
Not only that, but I remember when I was married to another cop, and he was like, hey, he's like, we literally went on our honeymoon, and that Monday he started on that task force. And it was just because he was supposed to start it. And, he got tapped for that. This now was after, because of 9/11 and all of that. Right. So he got tapped for it, and they were like, okay, effective Monday, you're going to start reporting to this location. And he was like, well, sir, I'm going on my honeymoon. And they're like, okay, well, when you get back, and then we had kids and stuff. And he was like, well, he's like, I think I want to put in for sergeant. And I was like, well, what about my career? What about my goals?
Yeah.
And I'm the one who wanted to be a cop for my entire life. He would decide. He had a really bad accident when he was in his early 20s. Yeah. Firefighters and the officers that responded to his accident, he had an accident where his car rolled over and went down and back. And it was pretty bad. So he went into, became a first responder because of this accident. how, they had an impact in his life. But I was like, dude, like, what about my career? What about my
Yeah.
goals? So it's like, I was like, you know what? I can't wait until you're done with your career goals because I want to get mine. I mean, we started together
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, so that did become a little bit of a challenge. And then I was like, I'm putting in for these other units. And it was like, well, what about daycare? I go, well, let's figure it out. I go, it shouldn't all fall on my shoulders.
Yeah. It's a team. It's a family,
So,
right? I love
right.
that. I mean, this is one of the things I wanted to talk about, the challenges for women in policing, because I have no legitimacy to talk about it, but I like the conversation being had. My wife is very career driven. She has been since I met her, which is like one of the things, my favorite things about her is just how she's constantly driving towards improvement, self-improvement, improvement of the team, and just elevating. But she's not in law enforcement, but certainly she's worked all kinds of different, corporate, startup, retail, outside of that, tech, and it's all male dominated, right? And so it's been interesting to hear her share some of her opinions, her frustrations, her perceptions, and her experience, her and her female coworkers, compared to her male, and all these. And I think I've tried to pick her brain so many times, especially in the last bit, because I think as a recruiter, as a hiring manager, and if you have any overlap in these fields, you should be as mindful as you can, especially as a male, to at least try to ask some questions and ascertain some information. Going back, like what prompted me to want you to come on the show, like, was, me reposting a Fit Responder, a little reel, right? Where it was all these, there's some humor, but for sure a lot of stereotypes and just like the frustrations for a female officer as a police officer, right? And the first responder. And it was, basically chauvinistic attitudes. It was all these different things and then you were essentially, maybe I'll just turn it over to you. What were your impressions on that video?
The video, basically, what the reel was, and this is from Fit Responder, who has a pretty amazing information out there, but was about the way people perceive female officers, or the things that female officers, they're not necessarily stereotypes.
No, they have to deal with. Right? Yeah.
Things that female officers have to deal with, like when you pull traffic, they're like, hey, baby. Like, I have people call me, hey, baby. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not your baby. You can address me as Officer Gaines or ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
And it's different times too. But when I came on, like, females really had to prove themselves that we could have a chair at the table.
Mm-hmm.
And let me tell you about an experience I had, even in the police academy, in the LAPD academy. I remember my squad leader telling me once, you don't belong here.
Wow.
And I was like, okay. And I was like, and he was like, you need to, like, just get out of here. You don't belong here. And I was like, I don't care what you think. I go, I'm here, so just accept it. And I walked away from him. And I don't even remember what prompted him to tell me this, but I was like, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember when I came on the job, my first training officer had like 27 years on the job. I was in like what I call the dinosaur team, because I work for an agency where I started so young. People saw me grow up. So I think that's harder because they see you as this little kid all the time. Like I was a grown woman at this point, right? Yeah. And they're like, oh, they treat you like their daughter or like their baby sister. And they're always like, oh, let me do that for you. And I'm like, no, this is my call. It's my handle. Like, I'm handling this call, And then you had some other people who were like purposely trying to get you into a fight to see if you would get in or not. And I don't think that that's cool. Like, don't instigate something.
Let it happen. It'll happen, right? Like, it'll happen in time.
It's going to happen in its own, believe me, And so that was some of the things. There was, I remember when I got pregnant the first time, I had gotten a doctor's note to be excused from having to qualify with my firearm. Not because I couldn't do it, but because of the lead content at the fire range.
Right. Yeah.
It could affect your child.
Very wise, yes.
I had gotten a letter from the doctor, and past practice was that, female officers who are pregnant and get excused. At the time, this captain that I had was like, well, if you can't shoot, then you can't carry your gun. And I was like, well, I can still shoot if I need to. I'm just asking to be excused from qualifying because of the lead content. And I have a doctor's note, so it's a justified reason. It doesn't really prevent, it's not like I'm handicapped and can't shoot.
Mm-hmm.
And it became a big thing. So, I got removed from patrol. I got put into dispatch. The thing is that the department had already set a precedence at the time. Other female officers had worked the front desk. I was like, well, why can't I work the front desk just like the other officers have in the past? Mm-hmm. And he was like, nope, you can only carry a gun when you're off duty, not on duty. And I was like, this makes no sense.
It's like worse, yeah.
So it was just getting worse and worse and worse, the situation that I was put into. One day I get a call from the director of HR, city HR, and it was a female. And she had gotten word of what was going on. And I was like, yeah, this is what's going on. She just wanted to confirm. And she was like, these are your rights as an employee. And this is what the city policy is. And the problem was that at the time, the department really didn't have a policy on how to, what to do with female officers who were pregnant and how to accommodate them during their pregnancy. So I started gathering policies from other agencies, and surprisingly, not many people had them. So I remember meeting with the chief of police then and saying, hey, I've noticed that we don't have a policy on how to accommodate female officers who are pregnant. And people are being treated differently. I am definitely being treated differently than like all the other female officers I've seen who were pregnant before me. Maybe this is a time to establish some type of policies and procedures. Here's some copies. And I provided him with the copies of the other agencies. And he was just like, oh, okay, thanks. And he just kind of like, take care. And so then another female officer became pregnant, and she was a much tenured officer. And then when she was told like, hey, you can't carry your gun, she was like, F you, I'm going to continue to carry my gun. You can't tell me. And then the city attorney got involved, and they were like, no, you guys can continue to carry your guns. Minerva, you can go back to patrol working the front desk. So I went through that. And that was the only time that I felt like I was really treated differently. Yeah. Because I kind of being penalized because I was a female officer, because obviously guys don't get pregnant. They don't have to deal with any of that. I actually even had a commissioner who, I used to testify in his court, and he was like, Minerva, he's like, your agency just doesn't learn. At the time when I came on, 3 female officers had sued the department for sexual harassment, and they had won a case where they were awarded like $4.5 million. Wow. This was now a year or two later. My situation being, when I was pregnant. And he was like, they don't learn, just take them all the way. But I was like, yeah, but then I'm the one that has to come back to work, and then I'm the one that has to deal with all these guys that I work with. I go, it's a different culture for females. I go, I have to think about that. It's not as simple as just suing for discrimination, because then you have to deal with the backlash, the retaliation from the guys. And he didn't think about that. Yeah. He didn't have to.
Yeah. A lot of
He's
people
not a woman, right?
And a lot of people don't want to sue. They don't want to go through the stress and the time and the energy. They just want it to be better. They just want it to stop, or, stop.
I was just like, leave me alone. Just let me do my job, right? Yeah. I never asked for special treatment aside from being excused from qualifying, but for a good reason. Not because I didn't want to shoot, but because, I had to protect my baby, right? And people would tell me, like, guys would be like, you should just go out stress leave, go home and just enjoy your pregnancy. And I was like, no, I am not going to give him the satisfaction.
Yeah, because then you're fighting this battle. It's not just for you, but clearly it's the precedent, right? And it's,
right.
People hear this story now and they're like, there's no way, right? But unfortunately, it's officers like you that experienced that made it better, because you didn't just say, okay, yeah, whatever you want. Because you didn't just roll over and say, okay, I'll just be on leave.
And it's not my personality to just roll over and be like, yeah, okay.
No, probably not. You're a cop. Yeah, not a cop. Yeah.
I was like, yeah, people would be like, just go home, stress leave, and enjoy your pregnancy. I'm like, it's the principle behind it. Like, I shouldn't even be here in this situation right now. Mm-hmm. That got cleared out. I think guys don't always understand, meaning guys like the guys that I work with. For example, some of the guys that I used to work with that were in the same patrol team that I work with, they were like, hey, we're going to go have drinks. Why don't you come? And I'm like, no, I'm good. And then after a while, one of the guys goes, this was like months of them asking, right? Yeah. They were like, how come you never come out with us? And I said, because if I come out with you guys, I'm the only female and I'm going to be sleeping with one of you guys. That's what people are going to think. And I go, I have a husband at home. I go, I don't need drama. I don't need to bring drama to my marriage, to my door. And I go, not only that, but if people, I go, people are just going to have that perception. And I go, and I don't want to create problems for your marriages either. I go, so when you guys make it that we can bring our spouses, I would happily join you guys.
Yeah.
But other than that, I go, I will not. And he was like, no one's going to think that. I go, yeah, they will. I go, because I've heard it from other people when other female officers have gone out with you guys. I go, I know you don't have to think about it, but I do. And he was like, you're right. He's like, I never thought about it. I go, because you don't have to, but I do.
Yeah.
And I go, and I have a marriage. I go, I have a husband at home. Do you think I want my husband to be hearing rumors that, even though they're not true, that I'm messing around with other people at work? Like, absolutely not. I wouldn't even put myself in that situation.
Yeah, it's so. I think that's so helpful to consider the culture, right? You had the anecdote to say, "Hey, I know because I've heard that happen, whether or not it's true. Like, I just see that happening, and I'm not going to plug and play myself in that situation and have those things hurt, like being said outside in the hallways when I'm not around. I really hope that more cultures aren't so much that way now. But I also love the added part that you put in, which I think is amazing when crews can get together with spouses, right? And I think that there's probably some benefits to having time when you're talking with your team, whatever casual conversations, or you go out and maybe it's dinner, maybe it's not going out all night kind of thing. I think that's also very intertwined with healthy balance, right? But to have families get together with barbecue, and there's so many ways that you can enhance camaraderie that aren't necessarily in that very all too common type of coping mechanism that we know in first responder work.
And and after that, it was nice. I got to meet their wives, because I would hear them talk about their wives, but I didn't know who they were. So it was always nice to put a face to the names and to get to know them.
Yeah. And they get to know you, right? So even if there are
and they get to know me too.
They're like, oh, Minerva, I don't have to worry about my husband and Minerva. She's cool, like she's my people now. Yeah. And so that, and then I actually worked at a city that is predominantly Middle Eastern. Now here's a woman in a position of authority telling a Middle Eastern man what they can and cannot do. So there were challenges there too. Yeah.
You can't tell me. And I'm like, yes, I've had situations where they were like, I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk to man officer. And I was like, well, I'm here now. Yeah. What's the problem?
Yeah, I love that.
I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk to man officer. I go, okay, then go to the station and talk to the man officer over there.
I love that.
10-8, I'm out, clear.
Too bad, right? You get what you get. Or I love... it was retired Sergeant Donna Brown was on my podcast, but she had a very similar thing, right? Just being in the culture, and someone's like, I don't want to talk to you. Like, I want to talk to a man. She's like, well, I'm here. And then her backup shows up. She's like, all right, I'm going to talk to you. He's like, no, you're not. You're talking to her. She's your officer. I'm just here for backup. So we can both leave. And I was like, I like that it's not only the officer standing up for herself, but also the team, right?
Yes.
And there's a time and place where maybe, hey, it's a version of verbal judo if two people aren't getting along. But when you make it about gender, you're like, hey, we're here to help. And if you want to be a barrier to that, then recognize that you are the barrier to that, not me. It's so inappropriate.
And I had situations too where the guys were like, no, she's the main officer. You talk to her. So I also had situations where the guys would back me up too. But that specific situation, my backup was a female officer too.
Oh, that's even better. You're like, okay,
so he had two female officers. You can drive yourself to the station and talk to the guy officer at the front desk.
Yeah, it's so nonsense.
But it is. And I hope things have changed. I really do hope things have gotten better for females, and I think not saying that females should be promoted to higher levels, in the upper rankings, but it's definitely needed to change the culture and to change the way of thinking.
If you don't ask yourself why not? Like, how do you know that you have the practices that are creating barriers or not, right? If you put yourself under the microscope and you don't find anything, then that's cool, right? And if you have female members of your department contributing to those conversations, then great. Maybe just no one wants to promote, that's female or underrepresented in this way or that way. But if you solicit the input and people do have things to share, and you aren't receptive to that, then that is an issue. And so that's what I really appreciate, your anecdotes, your experiences, and not just yours, but your peers and things that you've seen, certainly not just your department, but others, right? And you tell the story, there's definitely going to be listeners, male and female, that are like, yep, I've seen that. Or, yep, there's a retired administrator that talked to one of my fellow officers in that way, or making these, kind of razzing jokes, but only based around the fact that she's female, not around, something like where I'm being razzed because I was late, or he's being razzed because his reports are too short. So I think it's all part of it. And so I really appreciate you sharing that. As we talked about just before the recording, I do think that because if you're underrepresented in any way, you may have this feeling like you need to prove. So you almost want to deny that it's a factor. It's not a factor to your abilities. No, it's not. It doesn't mean you're not as able, but just to recognize some of those obstacles or some of those prejudices can be hard to deal with when you're just trying to do your thing.
Right. Yeah. And kind of going back to the story when I was pregnant, I remember when I got pregnant the second time, I had just gone to the community policing unit. And I remember being we had a nice big community room where we would sometimes have meetings or different events happen there. And I was helping move chairs, and this guy literally yelled across the auditorium in front of everybody, like, hey, is it true that you went to community policing because you want to get pregnant and have another kid and you don't want to work patrol? And I looked at him and I was like, is that what you guys are so worried about? Like, why don't you worry about your own lives? Stop worried about what I do in my life.
Yeah.
Like, really? I go, you're going to yell this out in front of everybody. And he was like, oh, well, that's what I heard. And I go, I don't care what you heard. I go, why don't you come to me instead of yelling it out in front of everybody? And I go, and first of all, it's none of your business what I do in my personal life. I go, how about I moved because I wanted to learn something new and not do patrol anymore. I go, do you ever ask the guys that? Like, why do they transfer out of patrol? I go, you guys don't ask each other that. But yet you ask me because I'm a female.
Right.
Like, that's the dumb stuff that sometimes females have to deal with. Like, it's not just because we also want a career in law enforcement and we also want to move up the rank and we also want to try different things, So it's stupid. And I really hope it's changed because that was a very long time ago. But, I'm sure the women before me have gone through other things too. I mean, I know it. I've seen it. I've heard it. I hope it's changed. And sometimes it's not just the guys. Sometimes it's other females. Like you mentioned earlier, sometimes females are like, no, that's not really what happens. And it's like, yeah, it is. Like, I remember going to some females when I was going through my pregnancy issue the first time, and they were like, I don't want to get involved. Yeah. And I'm like, okay. I remember one of my female friends doing lineup training, and this other female who was a brand new, I think she was still on probation. And I heard her mocking my friend who had done the presentation. And it just so happened her locker was next to mine. And I went into the locker room and she was there. And I remember telling her, like, hey, it's hard enough being a female in this job. We don't need to put each other down. I go, you just got here. We've been here. Like, learn your place. Oh. And she just looked at me like, and I was like, no. I was like, it's hard enough being a female here. Do not put us down. And I just walked away from her, like, let her digest that.
It was definitely that call out culture can be so helpful sometimes. Just say it, right? And just be, for as much as we say we're alphas and we say we're all type A, we're not. There's always the peanut gallery, whether it was the dude yelling at you across the room or this gal. It reminds me of this. Recently, I saw an article by Jen Moss. She's a retired lieutenant with Tucson. I'm like 90% sure. But it was in Police One, but she was writing on her experience and she broke down these different types of barriers. And some of it was females being in the way of other female officers and being more judgmental. Sometimes it came from a nature, as if I remember the article correctly, trying to protect other females from the stressors and the obstacles of the job. So almost unintentionally, kind of becoming a barrier. And I think about that and I reflected and I was like, okay, like, very informative, very intriguing. And I think about that for myself and I wonder, I was like, how can I conceptualize this for me? And I'm like, okay, take an Asian dude. And for sure, when I remember back and seeing, when I was just a few years on and being on oral boards or something like that, I would get frustrated when there was like an Asian male, like, showing up to an oral board or getting hired that was not representing well. We hired a guy that is infamous years after. So I was like maybe a 4 or 5 year cop. Of course, could never escape this. His claim to fame was in academy when they were having to change out really quickly, and they were in DT, so they're in sweats, and they had to change back into their academy uniforms with gun belt and mock guns. Is he put his gun belt on upside down, and then he got into the drill line for inspection, but he was in such a rush, but didn't pick up on that. And I'm like, come on. And I remember being specifically frustrated. Almost like there are not that many Asian dudes here, and that's the guy, right? And he didn't make it. But I was like, man, and I reflect, that did bother me more because he was an Asian American guy. And there not being that many of them, I was like, man, you're going to show up in this way. You're repping a region of the world now. So I don't know if it's like it's just my small attempt to create some sort of understanding, but I could definitely see aspects of that.
It's not any different than when we hear in the news a cop do something that you're like, like you're making us look bad, like all of us, right? So it's the same thing. Like when a woman does something on the job that you're like, dude, come on. Like it's already hard enough being a female. Like don't mess it up and make us like, don't feed those stereotypes. Don't feed those reasons why people like keep thinking that women don't belong in this job.
I think that's a really
like,
good
don't
comparison.
Feed that narrative.
How you explain it, right? So if you're a cop and some cop messes up, that sucks. And then, but the smaller you make that niche culture, then the more personal it is, right? So if it's a cop in your state, or it's a cop in your city, or your department, or your gender in your department, then it just narrows it smaller and smaller and smaller, where it's more by proxy representative of you. So it hurts more. It's more frustrating.
I think I also came on in it where law enforcement kind of comes in waves, right? And so a lot of the upper chain of command when I came on was a lot older, different times, different ways of thinking. And a lot of those people are kind of gone. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of younger people coming up. And I hope with that comes change in how male officers view female officers. And not just that, but other cultures too that are going into law enforcement. Like you said, the Latino guy, like, wow, you're Asian, like you're an Asian sergeant, we need that. Like you do need that, whether you like it or not, you do need it. Now, should it be an only factor to get hired? Absolutely not. But we do need representation of all kinds everywhere, I feel.
And I do think and hope it's getting better overall. I'm sure there's a lot of these very prevalently in certain departments, whether it's discrimination or the obstacles that we've been talking about. But I do think that in the big picture, slowly but surely getting better, having the conversations, the 30 by 30 initiative to make a concerted effort to hire more women for policing. And again, I heard a lot of female officers in the region, or female officers I know that heard it, and they're like, I hate it. I hate it because you're making numbers. Yeah. But then to hear a lot of female police leaders, some that I was able to meet, assistant chiefs, retired Lieutenant Moss that I talked about, they love it, right? Because they're like, again, it's not affirmative action. It's just saying you're going to make an effort to engage, right? And if you don't have a culture that's supportive of promoting or even hiring, then you got to ask yourself, why is that? Or why don't women want to work here? Why don't women want to do this job? We're talking about this crazy national attrition. And if we want more cops, like, how do we not better engage nearly roughly 50% of the populace, to help fill that? Do more men recognize the value of their female partners? Man, I hope so, because one of my favorite patrol partners came up hired within a month of me. We were in a sector together for years before we went our separate ways and getting a different assignments. Did she go to detectives because she's a woman? No, because she was a kick-ass officer, but she was a legit patrol officer, right? Like DT instructor, could run laps around me, and she was always just there, right? Been in some scuffles, alongside her. So I think that it's sometimes those examples maybe can help paint the picture. But if you're going to be a hater, of course they're going to write that narrative, and so be it. Kind of rewinding back a little bit, going back to your point, things do change slowly, but as I'm often reminded, a few years is kind of a blink of an eye in law enforcement and government change, and it's happening, right? A lot of these, maybe they're part of the problem. A few years, a lot of them will be retired out.
A lot of them will, I hope. And a lot of them have already kind of been gone, the guys that came on in the 60s and 70s. different times, but I just hope it's better. I really do. I hope it's better for females now, the culture wise, right? Because I think one of the things you and I had discussed when we were talking about this episode is how do you change that culture? And I'm like, I don't really know how you change that culture. I think I'll just stop seeing. And now things are different. Now you have women in the corporate world who are like CEOs and COOs and stuff like that. You have more women making more money than some men. As a society, we're just changing too. Women are no longer these damsels in distress, but also like, don't be a chick who's like the victim mentality, has the victim mentality.
No one needs that.
Like, because women like me, we don't like that either. But we don't like that in both men and women.
That's what I was going to say.
Women.
I was like, let's just fewer victims, especially in police in general.
Yeah.
And I love that. How do you change culture? There's so many prongs. I feel like I'm a culture nerd. I'm trying to always study how can we move the needle? And I think it's in really simple ways oftentimes. It's so cheesy, but be what you want to see. Be the change you want to see. Be the man in the mirror.
Yeah.
A little bit of just modeling, regardless of whether you're a police leader or you're a retired cop or you're a brand new cop, whatever you want to demonstrate, like people are watching, right? The public's watching, that little kid's watching, that you might be a 6-month cop, but the brand new one is seeing how you do business. So if you are frustrated about some of the things you heard in this episode, that traditional stuff that is slowly phasing out, then show you're frustrated about it, right? Highlight and support your female team members. If you're female, then elevate others. If you're a female leader, like recognize that, right? And then also recognize like we need leaders, whatever your gender, whatever your station.
We need leaders and mentors too. Because there could be people who are in a position of leadership but don't have the mentor mentality.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Especially now. I mean, policing has changed so much in the last decade, that I've been retired, but, and because of other, reasons, right? But this is a time to be mentoring people, we all say that, do the right thing, right? Do the right thing. Don't just say it, be it. Like you said, be the change that you want to see.
Model it, mentor, and then invest in the next generation. That's where I say, even if you're the 6-month cop, then the next generation is the brand new one, or the cadet, at your department, or the explorers, or the kids, like the school event that they need someone to go. And Sarge is like, hey, before I make somebody go, I need someone to volunteer, then just volunteer. Like you can be that person. So, we talked about mentorship and all the things from hiring, anything you want to leave the audience with.
This is still a great career. I feel that, I've been gone for some time, but my best days were patrol days. I loved working patrol. I'm very fortunate that I got to do my dream job. I know many people grow up saying, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that, and they don't really actually do it. And life takes them in other directions, but it's still a great job. Just do it with honor and be respectful of everybody you come in contact with. I remember I was never like a full training officer, but every once in a while I'd have trainees ride with me. And I would always tell them, I don't care how big of an a-hole you're dealing with, you always treat people with respect. You never lower yourself to their level. We always have to be respectful and honorable. And when I was in the academy, they would tell us, always act as if your family was watching the news and you were on it. They wouldn't be ashamed of what you do.
That's so wise, because you should assume that it's being a lot of us
nowadays. Everything's being recorded.
For a fact, you at least are recording it, but sometimes how do people miss that, or other officers miss that? But that's the point. Is that's what integrity is, right? Act as if someone's watching, even if no one is. But now you are actually being watched.
There's a ton of eyes on you, and you should always. And you shouldn't just act right because eyes are on you. You should just do it because it's the right thing to do. But always treat people with respect. Now, there are times where, you're going to have to let people know of your presence because that situation requires it. And you as an officer need to stay in control of the situation. But you also have to be in control of how you react to the situation too. Yeah. So just keep that in mind.
That's so good. Yeah, be a professional, because I'm with everyone else, right? I've had my moments of low patience. I've had my moments of frustration. I've said things that I would not be proud to repeat, how I talk to people, whether they were offenders or not. And I'm not going to make it about the stress of the job. I was unprofessional.
I have my few situations like that too. And sometimes you got to be like, okay, is this something that happened at home and I'm projecting on people out in the streets? Like, take a step back and be like, hey, check yourself.
Yeah, and we're all human, right? So I'm highlighting, let's say I'm not pointing fingers saying, hey, like, never have a bad day. But we have to recognize that And I'll add this: I've had bad days where I came off pretty hot with people, and as soon as things settle down, especially later in my career, I'll say I circled back and I apologized. I was like, "Hey, sir, I apologize for yelling at you. This was a very hectic scene when we came in. I didn't know whether you're the suspect. I didn't know whether you're a victim. I didn't know whether you're a bystander. I don't know who you are, and I'm not making an excuse for that. I'm just saying I'm apologizing. I appreciate that you're giving me some time, and things have calmed down a bit. And when you level with people, man, like 99% of the time, it's so much better. And then I didn't leave as that rude cop. I was the cop that, we were able to meet person to person, shake hands. But man, if I didn't clarify that, or I didn't fall on my sword a bit or humble myself, then that's I'm just fulfilling a stereotype now.
Yeah, I get that. I've had my situations too when I was in patrol where, when you're in patrol, you go from a call that, your adrenaline is like running 1,000 miles an hour. Now your next call is like a report call of a stolen bike, but your adrenaline is still like super high, and you just need to learn to control yourself.
Breathe, take a moment.
Breathe, yes.
Sometimes the calls won't stop, so maybe that stolen bike can wait 2 minutes. I really appreciate your time, your service in your career, outside of your career. You're still literally here, for the last hour and a half, but then with Ken, team, just helping more people find this work, doing this meaningful work. So, thank you for your continued service in doing that and making our community safer, finding more cops.
Yeah. And for those of your audience who is not aware of our podcast, is Police Applicant Podcast. Take a listen. We have a lot of good information about the hiring. Ken started it, I think, almost 4 years ago, because I've been a co-host now for 2 years. So it's a lot of information. If you want to know more about me specifically and my journey, I know I mentioned that I failed out of the LAPD Academy. I had to start all over. I'm episode number 12, so feel free to go take a listen to learn more about my background. I'm excited. Thank you for having me on your podcast.
Episode 12. I feel so fortunate to have connected with y'all. Really, I'm going to make this episode a little longer, but, really just, with Donovan being on the show, talking about recruiting, and then me and Brian came on. And then we started thinking, man, what a platform! People make fun of me how much I digest and listen to podcasts as a form of information. But yeah, what an opportunity to share, and what a resource to use to engage more of our candidates, right? And so, in line with Blue Grit and starting this, to do my own and just to try to reach people and try to mentor people in a different way and try to scale that so our conversations can be listened to by a lot of people. I would love a lot of my applicants to meet you, and I won't be able to facilitate that, but they can listen in, they learn about you, and glean all the resource and all the wisdom that you've shared today.
Yeah, that we have shared so much information, how to get through the interview process, the do's and don'ts, the polygraph, the psychological, everything, the academy, what to expect. We have so much content there that would help a lot of your listeners, really get a good understanding of what to expect during the hiring 100%, process.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me, it sounds like you need to get back on it and I need to get back on it. So we'll make it happen before too long. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.